General Hospital spoilers tease that Portia has uncovered a shocking truth in Drew's medical records, a dark secret that could not only put an end to his blackmailing but potentially destroy his political career and public reputation. After several nights of secretly accessing the hospital's computer system during off hours, Portia discovered detailed records of the brain surgery Drew underwent years ago, not just the removal of the chip Helena Cassadine had implanted in his brain, but also disturbing notes from psychologists about memory gaps and unusual triggers in Drew's behavior after being rescued from Peter August's captivity. Digging deeper into the files, Portia found a series of psychological reports conducted after Drew returned to Port Charles, documenting moments where he appeared to disconnect from reality. Short periods when he acted mechanically and later had no memory of what had happened. These reports had been labeled classified and buried deep in the system, likely at Drew's request or by those concerned about the consequences if the information ever got out. But the real shock came when Portia discovered a locked file containing blood and brain test results from after Drew returned to Port Charles, tests that showed traces of an experimental drug known in intelligence circles as a powerful brainwashing agent, capable of creating a sleeper soldier who could be triggered to carry out violent actions with no memory afterward. This drug, developed by a secret branch of the WSB, had been used in outlawed experiments in the 1980s and 1990s, and its formula was believed to have been destroyed. Its presence in Drew's system not only confirmed he had been programmed by Peter August far more deeply than anyone had known, but also suggested Peter may have had access to high-level intelligence resources. The more Portia studied the drug, the more alarmed she became. According to the medical documents, it binds to specific brain receptors and can remain in the nervous system for years, possibly decades. Unlike the chip that Dr. Patrick Drake removed, this layer of psychological programming couldn't just be cut out with surgery. It had become part of Drew's brain structure, lying dormant until the right triggers set it off. Portia also uncovered a particularly disturbing detail in notes written by Jason Morgan during the time he and Drew were held captive together in Greece. Jason described an incident where Drew suddenly became violently aggressive after seeing a specific tarot card, and how Jason had to use another card and a specific phrase to shut Drew down. These notes were taken as part of Jason's debriefing with law enforcement upon his return, and were supposed to be sealed, but somehow ended up in Drew's overall medical record. Now, as a new wave of events unfolds, Portia, with the evidence in hand, not only made copies of all the documents but also secretly contacted Dr. Kevin Collins, a psychiatrist with expertise in mind control techniques due to his research on his twin brother Ryan. Without revealing the patient's identity, Portia described her findings and asked whether this kind of programming could ever be undone. Kevin's answer confirmed her worst fears. There was no reliable way to completely remove the programming. Even with intensive therapy, the subject would always be vulnerable to triggers and could become violent if exposed to the right stimuli. Drew hadn't just been programmed, he almost certainly could still be triggered by specific cues, making him a walking time bomb with the potential for extreme violence and no memory of it afterward. This explained the recent erratic changes in Drew's behavior, the sudden personality shifts, the increasing assertiveness, and his manipulative behavior in relationships. Portia began to wonder whether Drew was even fully aware of his condition, or if he might be acting under some kind of influence he couldn't control. After careful review of all the evidence, Portia decided to share her findings with Curtis, the only person she felt she could trust with such dangerous information. Though initially skeptical, Curtis quickly changed his tune when Portia showed him the medical records and reminded him of what Drew had once confided about his captivity under Peter August. Curtis recalled a private conversation in which Drew had admitted to feeling like a part of himself no longer belonged to him. At the time, Curtis had chalked it up to trauma, but now realized it might have been something much deeper. With Curtis's help, Portia began to formulate a plan, not only to protect herself from Drew's blackmail but also to protect Port Charles from the potential threat he posed. This was no longer just about her medical career, this was about public safety. The counterattack Portia was preparing was no longer defensive, it was a full-on offensive, designed to protect both her future and the city from a man who could turn into a killer at any moment. She and Curtis began researching the specific tarot card and trigger phrase used to activate Drew's killer mode, not to use them, but to ensure Drew never came in contact with them again. They also started gathering information on Drew's recent activities, paying special attention to unexplained periods of absence or times when he couldn't be contacted. A disturbing pattern began to emerge, several incidents where Drew seemed to disappear for hours, only to reappear later with no reasonable explanation. Even more troubling. Some of these absences coincided with unexplained violent events in the area, including an attack on one of Drew's potential political rivals. With each new puzzle piece, Portia and Curtis became increasingly convinced that Drew might still be under someone's control, possibly Sidwell, who had ties to both the intelligence community and the criminal underworld. If Sidwell knew about Drew's condition and had access to his triggers, he might be using Drew as a tool to achieve his own goals, perhaps even to eliminate Sonny Corinthos. Portia sent a secret message to Drew, requesting a private meeting at her clinic, where she planned to present the evidence and make a simple demand. Drew must cease all blackmail attempts against her and withdraw entirely from politics, or she would go public with the information that a U.S. senator is a potentially brainwashed assassin susceptible to hostile triggers. Curtis opposed the plan, fearing that confronting Drew directly could be dangerous. He argued that if their suspicions were correct, forcing Drew into a corner might activate the very response they feared, since they had no idea how he would react under pressure. Portia, however, felt there was no other option. Drew was growing increasingly aggressive in his attempts to manipulate her, and she couldn't live under his threat any longer. What's more, if Drew truly was being controlled by Sidwell or another force, every passing day was another chance he could be triggered to hurt someone. She couldn't just sit by and wait for tragedy to strike. If Drew really was a danger, they had to act now, before it was too late. And if he wasn't, if he could prove that he had been cured or that the programming had been removed, then they needed to know that, too. What Portia didn't know was that the very meeting she was preparing for could trigger the exact violent reaction she was trying to prevent, especially since Drew was already beginning to feel cornered and manipulated by forces he didn't fully understand. Recently, Drew had started experiencing intense headaches and moments of disorientation, signs that the programming in his brain might be destabilizing. A high-stress confrontation could be the catalyst for a catastrophic episode. As she prepared for the fateful meeting, Portia took extra precautions. She sent a copy of all her documents to Alexis Davis, with instructions to release them publicly if anything happened to her. She also installed a hidden security camera in her office to record the encounter and arranged for Curtis to wait in the next room, ready to intervene if necessary. As the day of the meeting approached, tension in Port Charles was reaching a breaking point. Portia, armed with evidence and a detailed plan, was preparing to confront one of the city's greatest potential threats, not a villain who knew what he was doing, but a good man who had been turned into a weapon against his own will. And as she braced for the confrontation, one question still lingered. Can she save Port Charles from Drew, and can she save Drew from himself? Portia made a bold and irreversible move when she publicly released Drew's confidential medical records, a decision that shook all of Port Charles and sent shockwaves as far as Washington, D.C. After many sleepless nights wrestling with her conscience and tense discussions with Curtis, Portia chose the most decisive path to end Drew's threat, exposing his entire medical history, including evidence of mind control procedures, psychological programming, and the possibility that he remains a sleeper agent capable of being activated at any time. Instead of a private confrontation as initially planned, Portia took the information to the invader, where Alexis Davis, as both a lawyer and an ethical journalist, thoroughly verified the documents before publishing an explosive investigative report titled The Programmed Senator. The public's obsession with the story quickly spilled beyond the borders of Port Charles, as national news outlets swarmed to cover the possibility that a sitting senator might be a latent, automatic assassin. National security experts, former WSB agents, and leading psychiatrists were brought in to discuss the plausibility of mind control and the risks someone like Drew might pose in a position of power. The situation escalated rapidly, prompting federal investigations, not just into Drew, but also into the late Peter August and his connections to intelligence organizations. Questions flooded 24-hour news cycles. How did Drew pass security clearances to enter Congress? Did someone intentionally cover up his condition to use him as a pawn in a larger power game? Drew's dramatic fall from grace happened within mere hours of the article's publication. Once a respected senator and successful businessman, he became the center of a media storm and the subject of scrutiny from multiple government agencies. His office in Washington was sealed off by the FBI, while national security officers transported him to a secure facility for interrogation and psychological evaluation. Political allies distanced themselves swiftly, and a special congressional hearing was scheduled to determine whether Drew should be removed from office. The biggest blow came from Willow, who had once placed complete trust in Drew. With a trembling but resolute voice, she publicly accused him of increasing manipulation and control over the past few months. She detailed how Drew had gradually isolated her from Michael, coerced her into signing legal documents, and described moments when he seemed like a completely different person, possibly signs of his programmed personality taking over. Public perception of Drew began shifting at breakneck speed. Stories of his past kindness and generosity were now being re-examined in light of the revelations. Was that the real Drew? Or just a carefully crafted facade meant to hide something far darker? People who had worked closely with him started sharing their own stories, of strange, disconnected moments, sudden mood swings, and baffling decisions that now appeared to be symptoms of something much more sinister. With each passing day, the chaos surrounding the situation only escalated. Conspiracy theories ran rampant on social media, with some suggesting Drew was merely the tip of a much larger operation. Who programmed him? Who can trigger him? And are there others like him within the U.S. government? These questions dominated every corner of conversation in Port Charles. Meanwhile, Portia, the woman who set all of this in motion, was facing mixed consequences for her actions. While she had successfully eliminated the blackmail threat and potentially prevented a catastrophic tragedy, she had also broken one of the most sacred principles of medical ethics: patient confidentiality. Investigations by the medical board were underway, and her professional future remained uncertain. Still, one undeniable truth lingered: Port Charles, and possibly the entire nation, had been saved from a threat they didn't even know existed. And as the dust began to settle, one question remained. Who is the true victim here? Drew, the man whose life and mind were stolen and manipulated? Or the people who unknowingly placed their trust in someone who had been turned into a living weapon? Portia and Curtis found themselves entangled in a web of complex calculations as they tried to deal with the fallout of exposing Drew's medical records. Initially, they believed that revealing the truth would resolve the issue, but reality proved otherwise. Instead of being neutralized, Drew appeared to become even more dangerous under the mounting pressure. What they thought would be a final blow had unintentionally triggered a terrifying chain reaction, pulling them into a fight for survival they were not mentally prepared for. A new sense of paranoia began to grow between the couple as they started noticing signs of surveillance creeping into every aspect of their daily lives. At first, it was minor things: strange calls to their phones that ended the moment they answered, text messages appearing as read without anyone touching the devices. Then things became more alarming: windows left open without explanation, personal belongings subtly moved, and a persistent feeling of being watched while going to work or running errands. Mysterious figures appeared in the neighborhood late at night, vanishing whenever they tried to get a clear look. Individually, each sign could be dismissed or logically explained. But together they painted a disturbing picture: someone, or a group of people, was watching their every move. And the surveillance didn't stop at remote observation. It had penetrated their most private spaces. Curtis, relying on instincts honed from years in investigative work and past ties with intelligence agencies, secretly conducted a security sweep of their home and workplaces. The results confirmed their worst fears. He discovered sophisticated listening devices planted in Portia's clinic and throughout their home, including their bedroom. What was especially troubling was the quality of the equipment. Far from typical commercial-grade bugs, these were military-grade devices. featuring near-invisible microphones and long-range data transmission capabilities. These aren't the kind of devices a stalker or even a private investigator could get their hands on. Curtis told Portia as they discussed the findings in their backyard, the only place they felt safe enough to talk. This is government-level gear. The kind only accessed through military or intelligence channels. Someone with high-level clearance is watching us. They both knew that the only person with the motive and means to do this was Drew. As a U.S. congressman with a known past connection to the WSB, he had both access and reason to monitor them. This revelation elevated the threat from Drew to a whole new level. This was no longer just a matter of blackmail or reputation, it was about their lives. Meanwhile, Drew was revealing a much darker side than anyone had previously imagined. Though he maintained the image of a wronged man publicly, fighting unjust and immoral accusations, in the shadows, he was orchestrating a calculated revenge campaign. No action could be directly traced back to him. But a chilling pattern of disturbing coincidences began to emerge around those who had aided Portia. Several of Portia's allies at the hospital began experiencing suspicious accidents. Melanie, a nurse who had helped Portia access certain electronic medical records, lost her brakes en route to the hospital, resulting in a crash that left her hospitalized with serious injuries. Dr. Warren, a psychiatrist who had corroborated Portia's findings about Drew's mental state, suddenly came under investigation for alleged medical misconduct from a long-closed case over a decade old. Even acquaintances of Portia and Curtis weren't immune to this wave of misfortune. Curtis discovered that the Savoy, his nightclub, was undergoing unusually intense inspections for fire and health code violations, with minor infractions suddenly being treated as major issues that could jeopardize his business license. Tasha, a trusted waitress at the club, was arrested for drug possession, despite being known for her staunch anti-drug stance. Though nothing directly pointed to Drew. The pattern was undeniable. Anyone who helped Portia and Curtis or was even just close to them began suffering from an unusual string of bad luck. The message was clear. Standing with Portia and Curtis came with consequences. And the danger was escalating. Signs began to suggest that Drew wasn't acting alone. Curtis, using his old intelligence contacts, received alarming warnings. An anonymous source from within the WSB reached out, cautioning that there are elements within the government working to protect Drew Kane and advising Curtis to be careful who you trust, even those in uniform. This information painted a terrifying new picture. Certain powerful factions within the government might have known about Drew's status as a sleeper soldier and, instead of deactivating him, were actively using him for their own ends. Drew might not just be a victim of Peter August or Helena Cassadine, but a tool still being deployed by those with power and influence. The notion that Drew could be merely a pawn in a much larger conspiracy made the situation exponentially more dangerous. Portia and Curtis were no longer just facing a wounded man seeking revenge. They were up against a secretive organization with vast resources and no hesitation in using Drew as a weapon to protect its interests. We've stumbled into something much bigger than just going up against Drew, Curtis said to Portia during a conversation in a public park, one of the few places they still believed was safe from surveillance. This isn't just about blackmail or saving your career anymore. This is a government-level conspiracy that may have been using Drew, and others like him, as covert assets for years. The new battle they faced required a completely different approach than what they had originally planned. They could no longer rely on conventional channels like the local police or even the FBI. There was no telling how deep the corruption went or who might already be compromised. Instead of turning to law enforcement, they began building a trusted network of their own. Jason Morgan, with his extensive experience handling dangerous situations and unwavering loyalty to those he considered family, agreed to provide protection for the couple. He installed a new security system around their home and assigned trusted individuals to keep watch from a distance, ensuring Portia and Curtis were never truly alone. Spinelli, with his elite tech skills, took over the defense of their digital systems. He provided them with new phones featuring advanced encryption, set up a private, untraceable internet network, and even built an alert system to notify them of any suspicious activity near their residence. Operating in secret and communicating only through secure channels. This new network began gathering critical intelligence. They identified a pattern of secret meetings between Drew and several high-ranking government officials, including a veteran WSB agent named Anderson, someone with a history tied to rumored mind control research projects from the 1990s. As Drew grew bolder and his shadowy protectors became increasingly anxious about what Portia and Curtis might uncover next, the couple found themselves staring down a terrifying truth. They may have triggered something far beyond their control. They had exposed a secret that some of the most powerful forces in government were desperate to keep buried. And now they were fighting not just for their careers or reputations, but for their lives. One night, while discussing their next steps in Jason's apartment, one of the few places they trusted, Portia voiced her fears about whether they could actually win this battle. "We're going up against people with almost unlimited power," she said, her voice trembling. "How can we possibly hope to fight a secret arm of the government?" Curtis took her hand, his eyes resolute. "Because we have something they don't," he replied. "The truth. And we have people willing to risk everything to protect it. That's why they fear us, not because of what we know, but because we're not afraid to speak it." As they continued building their case against Drew and those backing him, both Portia and Curtis knew they had crossed a line of no return. The path ahead was perilous, but turning back would be even more dangerous. They had begun a fight they had to win, not just for themselves, but for the safety of all of Port Charles, and possibly the entire country.